So Russia and Belarus have reached a deal to station tactical nuclear weapons on Belarusian territory. This is according to Vladimir Putin. He announced this today. Now, tactical nuclear weapons are the smaller yield nuclear weapons used for battlefields. Think of them as kind of destroying a stadium-sized area, if not a little bigger, multiple city blocks, rather than large yield, high yield, city-killing ballistic missiles and those non-tactical nuclear weapons, what they would call strategic nuclear weapons. So these are smaller nuclear weapons. Putin said the move does not violate nuclear non-proliferation agreements because by comparing it to the U.S. stationing of nuclear weapons in Europe, specifically in Germany, for decades, which is true. The U.S. has had nuclear weapons in Germany for many decades now. Putin and Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko said they raised the issue of stationing such weapons in his country, which borders Poland, because they're afraid of Poland. That's bullshit. This is just an escalatory move by Putin to try and get the West to back out of Ukraine by once again flaunting nuclear weapons and nuclear weapons movements. This is not anything to do with a concern that Poland is going to invade Belarus or even Russia, because Poland is not going to do that. Russia is trying to save face with their absolute dumpster fire embarrassment of an invasion into Ukraine, and they're doing this by flexing the one thing that they have that the collective West gets concerned about, and that is nuclear weapons, because their conventional military is a dog water band of misfit garbage people. So that's where we're at. Now, Russia has already stationed 10 aircraft in Belarus capable of carrying these tactical nuclear weapons, and transferred Iskander tactical missile systems, which can also launch these nuclear weapons. Putin said that Russia has already helped the Belarusians re-equip the aircraft, and beginning on April 3rd, they would start training crews and building storage facilities for the nuclear weapons. It's anticipated to be completed by July 1st. He also said he would deploy depleted uranium ammunition if Kyiv received such munitions from the West. Now, this is not entirely surprising because Lukashenko offered to host nuclear weapons way back in November of 2021. And in March of 2022, Belarus changed its constitution to allow more Russian military control over their military. So good job, Lukashenko. You gave up your military to control to Putin. He did this because Putin basically helped keep him in office after basically losing the election in Belarus. But the Russians and Lukashenko regimes didn't want him leaving because a pro-democracy, pro-West government would be bad for Russia. Lo and behold, freedom and freedom-loving peoples are bad for Russia. So Belarus changed their constitution. Basically, Lukashenko and his party forced it to happen to allow a legal standing for Belarus to host Russian nuclear weapons. Belarus voluntarily gave up its nuclear weapons that it had from the Soviet Union back in the 1990s, but it seems like they're coming back. So here's a couple things about this. First, China is not going to like it. They are not fans of nuclear proliferation at all. They have a policy in China that their nuclear weapons are absolutely defensive, and they do not share those nuclear weapons. So when other countries do so, it is an affront to them. It doesn't matter if it's allies or enemies. They do not like proliferating nuclear weapons, and they have said so as much. So I don't know how China's going to respond to this, but coming just days after the visit that Xi Jinping and Putin had, it's got to come to a bit of a shock for them. So I don't think they're going to actually come out with a statement, and if they do, it'll be very muted. Second, these will not be Belarusian nuclear weapons. They will be Russian nuclear weapons stationed in Belarus. So Belarus will be able to use them and on their aircraft, but only with Russian authorization. It's a similar situation that takes place between the U.S. and Germany. Third, the Belarusian people who already don't like Lukashenko but serve somewhat reluctantly under his authoritarian and brutal regime will find yet another reason to be disgusted with his administration. The vast majority of Belarusians do not want to become nuclear armed. It makes them a target. Fourth, Russia has played its last non-nuclear strike card. It has nothing more. It has no other places to deploy more weapons, no other ways to saber rattle, no other ways to apply pressure. It has essentially shot its complete wad, and it's out of options other than to actually use nuclear weapons. So this is it. Putin is doing this to try to once again get the West to back off by using nuclear weapons as a saber rattling technique. And frankly, it won't work. In fact, it likely will backfire. And fifth, we can expect a ramp up of sanctions against Belarus and additional pressure put on Lukashenko by Western-backed opposition parties to his rule. And it will also likely push those that were on the fence about the Russian-Ukrainian war more into the Ukrainian camp, with those in this collective West probably wanting to send more weapons and countering Russia's nuclear saber rattling. It also may specifically spark other countries to lean more towards the West, potentially countries like India or Mexico or Turkey, who is Western aligned but has been somewhat reluctant, or even potentially Hungary, but I doubt that because Hungary has kind of been shitty about this whole thing for a long time. So I think this is going to backfire on the geopolitical stage. I think moving nuclear weapons and using that as a tactic, every time that seems to be something Russia does, the West sends more or even advanced weapons, and this may be a precursor for larger missiles such as the ATACMS, or potentially even sending Western aircraft to Ukraine. And then finally, for the United States, this doesn't change the calculus with regard to potential nuclear strikes, as nothing in Belarus would be able to strike the United States. These are weapons that are for a battlefield capability. So yes, they could potentially pose a threat to Poland, but they are outside of that, the bordering nations to Belarus, they aren't going to pose any kind of strategic threat. But what this does do to Belarus is it makes these sites a target for nuclear retaliation, or even nuclear first strike from the US, Britain, France, or Germany. And I guess I look at the Belarusian government, and I guess I look at the Belarusian people who I know tried to vote Lukashenko out, and say, boy, I hope it was worth bringing these nuclear weapons into your country, because now you are a nuclear target from the United States, Britain, France, etc. So if Russia were to ever implement some sort of nuclear strike, you all die too with Russia.